Hey guys, welcome to Between the Apexes with Dr. Speed Lemon and Hoggdust, and now our special guest host, Tim Mackie. Welcome, Tim.
Thanks for having me. Nice to see you, Speed.
Thank you, sir. All right, so let's talk about what happened this week in Portimao. I guess I'll start first before we get into the major drama. I think Pecco Bagnaia did a hell of a job managing the gap and managing his tires in both.
Yes, especially after you listened to his post-race interview and he talked about how desperate he was at the end. I think if Maverick had had a bit more tire left, it might have been a different situation, but they were both out of tire.
But it also showed Pecco's genius because his ability to manage the entire race, manage the pace, his level of understanding with the bike is already at a higher level.
Yeah, he's obviously the complete rider, right? Winning the sprint race as well with low fuel and different settings, and then doing what he normally does in the long race for sure. Yeah, Pecco's the man to beat this year. He's off to a heck of a start. Was it 37 points or something?
Yep, maximum points, 12 and 25. And then we have Maverick Vinales coming in second. I know you're a fan of Mav.
Yeah, big supporter of Mav. That was very reminiscent of Silverstone last year. Couldn't quite get there. I think when he did close the gap at one point, there just wasn't a possibility to pass, and I think that's indicative of the current state of the sport. With the aero, is passing is much more difficult to do. Everyone's so much closer in time, and you have the turbulence and other issues and. Yeah, it's definitely tough. It almost reminds me a little bit more of back in the old days with the 500s, where it's a little bit more processional and it's just so darn tough to get by the guys. So interesting how it's turned out with the aero for sure.
I would also put in Maverick's ability to stop the bike was better than anybody else. I think the front end of that Aprilia and his abilities were just perfect for that track. And you can see him closing the gap in certain corners to Pecco, but the Ducati power is giving them that advantage as well. But I think the front end where Maverick's going to get really strong, he's going to make that next step.
Well, that was one of the weak areas of the Aprilia, and I think that's why he selected the hard tire for that race, was especially because of the braking. I think Aprilia's improved a little bit in that area, but we'll see as the season progresses. I'm sure that Aprilia is really excited about going to Argentina, where Aleix won last year. And I think Maverick got 7th.
Yep.
Yeah. And, I kind of predicted his mediocre performances in the sprint, and I think he showed through. I mean, it just takes him a while to warm up. I don't know why, but...
Yeah, I know he's been working on the starts, but again, with Maverick, he's always what they say, the world champion of testing, and they did spend an awful lot of time at Portimao, so I think we're going to need to wait a few rounds to see exactly where Aprilia is. I think the new weekend format with less setup time, per se, is going to help them as well. They always seem to be pretty quick out of the box.
Uh-huh. And then, as predicted, Jorge Martin also did really well in the sprints. But unfortunately, we didn't get to see his full potential in the main event.
Yeah, he's certainly a contender, but man, he's got to bring it home. He's just got to bring that bike home. It's one of the knocks on him. I think he got second in Argentina last year, so he should do well this weekend to bounce back. I don't know how his ankle is from the Marquez contact, but yeah, I watched the race a second time, and it definitely seemed like it just blew his head. I don't know how much pain he was in, but to watch him go down again on the brakes, going into a corner, I think it was a lapse, and it's really going to cost him. Jorge's really got to tighten up finishing those races.
Yeah, he's got to work on his consistency over the long duration of the race, but his natural ability, his talent and speed is there.
Yeah.
I don't know how aggressive he's going to be in this next race because I think he has some broken toes. But we'll see. I definitely think he's going to be someone that can get on the podium for sure. But
Well, Tim knows what it's like to race without the use of toes. So, how do you think that's going to affect him?
Look, when you have an incident like that and you're injured on the bike, it's a big distraction. I think he lost focus, lost the front end going down. It would have been nice to bring it home, but yeah, that's one of the knocks on him. I think that's why Ducati went with Enea when it was between those two last year. Enea had the wins and he had less falls. I think it really came down to the consistency, like you said.
Sure, sure. And then the KTM boys, they did really well. Jack Miller did great in the sprints. I thought it was amazing that he managed to blow through his tire even in a 12-lap race. But I mean, that's just a testament to how wild he is on the throttle.
Boy, he's one of my favorite riders, and he never fails to surprise you. I really thought he'd struggle a bit more with the KTM, and initially it looked like he was. Now, from my understanding, Brad actually pinched some of his settings on Sunday for the race. So I think taking some of his Ducati crew and some of his Ducati knowledge over to KTM has been beneficial for them. One thing that was interesting in testing, both riders liked the new engine. They liked the new frame. They liked the new aero. I think it's just a matter of KTM pulling all of those elements together and getting some, that seat time with that bike. And I think they might surprise us this year. It's going to be good to see. It's nice to see Jack go over there and do well immediately. I was pretty surprised to see his position in both races last weekend.
Well, I was super stoked to see that. I mean, I couldn't have been happier. I loved every single second of it. And Jack had a very interesting comment after the race. And his comment was, the KTM is a more controllable bike than the Ducati is. It's a much smoother bike. Yeah. And that's very interesting because if you look at Ducatis, I'm like, they look so just smooth. And if he's feeling that right away, it's only a matter of time till they start making that natural step. So I'm really excited to see what KTM can bring to the table within the next few races.
I think all the aero the Ducati has makes it harder to flip it around.
Yeah.
I think now the Aprilia has slightly tidier, cleaner aero. I think they've kind of caught up Ducati and might even be starting to lead the way a little bit. But yeah, it'd be nice to see KTM come along with Jack and Brad Binder. Boy, Brad sure deserves it. He rides the wheels off that thing.
Yeah, his late pace speed in that last race was a great, like, his ability just to keep applying pressure, keep it moving, coming back, and that's that talent we were talking about last time. You got guys that could put down the speed right away. Then you got the guys that are fast late in the race, and those late race guys, I think those are the ones that are champions.
Yeah. I also think that Jack Miller's experience on the Honda as well as on the Ducati helped him prepare for the KTM, because I know that it's been said that the KTM and Honda are similar and come from a similar background, especially with Danny Pedrosa leading the development at the KTM. So that could have also helped him.
One thing that surprised me was his comment about how good the front end feedback was, especially now that Ducati is supposed to have very good feedback. You look at Alex Marquez, who went over from Honda and said, man, the feedback from this Ducati is amazing. So for Jack to compliment the KTM really speaks volumes.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of Alex Marquez, he did really good for his first race on the Ducati. I don't think it surprised too many people, though, because the Ducati is a great bike, and Alex Marquez is a Moto2 world champion. So I think we're going to see some good things from him, especially since he is pretty consistent. I think he'll consistently be in the points.
Yeah, for sure. He's on the 22 bike, which was the championship winning bike. And you look at he and Zarco and some of the second tier Ducati riders. In my opinion, they're better armed than some of the factory teams out there with that proven 2022 bike for sure.
Yeah, definitely in the beginning of the season, they have the advantage for sure. But, talking about Zarco, as you brought him up, man, that guy just kind of chilled back there. And then the last lap just yanked 3 spots out from those guys.
Yeah, that was crazy. That last lap he pulled off. Just amazing what he does. And again, he's one of those guys that seems to be a late charger a bit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and he's call him seasoned. I think he's he has that his racecraft down. He's been on the Ducati for a while. I think he did a great 2-for-1 pass there at the end.
He's got a high level of understanding with his experience.
All right, moving on. Marco Bezzecchi, a lot of people picked him as a favorite, and he proved himself with that third place podium in the main event. It was a lonely third place, but he did well on last year's bike. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he's always nipping at the heels. He's gotten on that podium a few times now, and I think he's knocking on the door. I'm not entirely sure what support 46 gets and what level of machinery they have, but Yeah, all of those satellite guys on any given weekend are going to be up there, and Marco is certainly one of those young lions that's up and coming.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so elephant in the room.
I already know it. Starts with an M.
Yeah, came through like a wrecking ball.
Yeah.
Yeah, Marquez. What can you say? It's a multifaceted story. I think he's got a deficiency with the bike. The bike's not where the other bikes are at. Mm-hmm. He's clearly overriding it to make up for it. His determination level is unreal. But you start looking at last year, I forget what race it was, when he just got on the throttle too early on that opening lap and stepped out sideways, and Fabio went into the back and went down, and then he got the fairing stuck in there and took out Taka. And if you look at this race, he locked that front earlier on the first lap. He was having trouble with that front end going into the corners. I mean, he shot way past, I think it was, who was leading, Martin at that point?
Yeah.
And then just ran wide out.
Pushed them both out.
That was on the first lap. So I think what happened with him was he just simply locked the front end, got in a little too hot. I don't think he was trying to pass Martin. He just made a mess of it all. Second, you release the brake once you've locked it, especially into a hairpin, there's nowhere to go but forward. So I don't think it was him riding mean or aggressively. I think it's just a part of his character. He's going to override that bike to want to be at the front. And it's part of when you go back to when he first came into this sport. I think he realized, hey, I am one of the greats in this sport. And he really wanted to go after all of those titles. And it's just part of his makeup. It's part of how 2015 happened and all of that. So, yeah, Mark's going to be just fine this year. I think Honda's going to be in trouble. He needs to just ease up a little bit. And the problem is everybody's jockeying on that first lap because you've got to make up one or two places from your gear position on that first lap, or your race is going to be bad with the way the passing is now. So, yeah, not too much of a knock on him. I know everyone was ranting and raving about a ban, and I'm usually pretty hard on the guy, but I think more concerning is going to be that broken thumb. I haven't broken that particular bone, but it's on your throttle hand, and that's going to take a lot of pressure under braking. So I don't know if he's going to be fully fit for COTA at this point.
Well, I'll rant on him because I was pissed at what happened. I hate that he came out after Miguel Oliveira like that. It's his home GP. I had big hopes for Miguel. And then that happened. And Miguel actually made an interesting quote in his interview. I'm not going to quote him word for word, but he says, usually when you have a problem on the brakes, we brake a little earlier. Mm-hmm. He already had that first warning. He could have, braked a little earlier, but, Mark knows best, right?
Well, that's why I call him Pinball. He's a bit of a pinball and a pinball machine sometimes. Yeah. I don't think he's going to win the title this year, not unless Honda pulls some real magic out of the hat with that bike, which I don't see happening. I think he's going to be a player. And again, part of his makeup makes him do this towing in qualifying. The reason he's up on that front couple of rows is because it's in his nature. He'll just go get that tow and get up there and mix it up. He's on a slower bike, and he's injecting himself in with the faster bikes, and he's overriding it to stay with them. And, this is what happens.
Yeah, speaking of qualifying, I felt like Mir was done a little dirty in there just because they had him go out first. Honda knew what was going to happen. Then
tow Mark around.
Yeah, tow Mark around, help him get into Q2. And then, he goes and does the same thing with Eneas. I mean, it's a strategy and it works. There's nothing against it in the rule books. It just seems like somebody at his caliber wouldn't also need to be drug around the track.
Yeah, you also have to say a lot of people have been doing that to him throughout his whole career. So it's kind of like, it's give and take. I feel like Mark went from hero to zero real quick. And for him to be able to qualify that bike at that level and get in there, first of all, is insane. And I don't know what his team's been telling him, because he seems like his big thing this week was, my team told me to different riding style and blah, blah, blah. No, they're telling you to brake a lot later is what they're telling you to do. And you're trying to exactly think about it. I'm like, that's the only thing you're doing different is you're diving into the corner harder. You're trying to make up the difference. and you're going to pay one way or the other. And he even said, and after the quali, he's like, hey, the riding style that I'm doing is not a good way to manage tires. It's not a good way to race. It's not a good way to keep this pace. It's not good. It's all I can do to be competitive. And so he knows what he's doing right now is not the way that you want to ride. Unfortunately, he's just an aggressive person, and he's a champion. He's going to do whatever he can do to claw his way to be number one, which is a risk to the other riders. I think if you're going to be that way, I personally think the penalties should be whatever you do to another person, it should be double to you.
What do you guys think of the penalty that FIM came up with? I know there's controversy around that, about him having to serve it in COTA instead of Argentina since he'll be out of Argentina.
Yeah, just to paint some light on that, before the whole season even started, all the riders, they sit in a little classroom and they are told by, the stewards and all them, like, well, if you do this, this is what happens. So it's already been blueprinted. Your first time you wash somebody out in a corner, you're supposed to get a double lap penalty. Then the next race you have to start from the pit, and then the race after that, if you do it again, you got to take a long pit ride through.
I guess the controversy is, though, since he's missing Argentina, is that his penalty, or should it be carried over to COTA? I think it should be carried over to COTA, personally.
Yeah.
So the way I read it is they just kind of misstated it when they said Argentina. I think their intent all along was, next race. I didn't think they considered him not being there in Argentina. And then they clarified it when he announced he wasn't going to be there. And then I think Honda appealed it yesterday, saying, hey, you put it out there and now you're changing it. And I disagree. I think he needs to serve this penalty one way or t'other. So I don't think that Honda's going to get anywhere with their appeal. And I think that they're certainly going to enforce it at COTA. And I was looking at that COTA track map. It's not a long lap penalty compared to some of the other tracks. You dip in at 13 and come right back out. Or is it, I think, when you're approaching 13, you come out at the exit there. Mm-hmm. So given what he did last year, other than his starting issue, it's not going to dent him too much. I think it's going to stop him winning, but a friend of mine thinks he's still going to get on the podium. So we'll see how he goes at circuit. Again, it's going to come down to that thumb. Having two screws in the bone behind your thumb is not going to be good on your throttle hand for sure. I think it'd be a little easier to deal with on your left hand.
Sure, and that's what I think. I think the penalty needs to be applied at the next race you're present for. Otherwise, people can get a penalty and just say, well, you know what, it's a good time for me to do arm pump surgery this time. Mm-hmm. I guess I won't have to serve my penalty,
Yeah, that's it. I think maybe, I forget which rider it was that brought it up, they should get back to the accumulation penalty point system where, and they did away with it. It was a few years back where you did something wrong, you got a point. I think this was put into place after Marco Simoncelli or around that time.
Yeah.
And
so is that not the way it is anymore?
And if you did something wrong, like blocking somebody in qualifying, going slow on the racing line, and that was your third offense that year, then you got a penalty. So I think they might start looking at an accumulation system for Mr. Marquez.
Yeah, changing the rule book as usual.
Yeah, you definitely need something that you got to make the riders more conscious of hurting your people around you.
Yeah.
Right now their focus is just trying to, be the first guy. But I'm all in for, elbows out and fighting, but there's an art to it. You don't want to put other people at risk while you're doing it. So
no, and I wouldn't want to race with somebody like that. You know.
No, nobody wants to line up with him now. And Rossi made the comment after Argentina in 18, I think it was, that he's ruined our sport. And in some ways, I agree with that sentiment. You look at Aleix. He's a clean rider. He came out after the last race and said, I had pace to be faster than the guy in front of me, but I did not make the pass because I just couldn't make it happen. And Marquez won't do that. He'll bully you out of the way, just like he did at Assen in 2015. Like he there's too many to actually list them all.
Yeah.
And so he came back at me and said, yeah, but what about Rossi in 15? I was mad at Rossi. If I was Gibber now, I'd have punched him in Parc Fermé. I wouldn't have sit there holding my shoulder, whimpering around. I think it was a BS pass.
Yeah.
I like making a clean pass. I always look at the great riders, and they would make those stunning last lap passes with no contact. Look at Casey Stoner for an example of that. So I don't like the hargy-bargy that we have now all race long. I can understand on the last lap, a little bit of contact, making that pass at the last lap, but these guys are doing it lap after lap. And I think it comes down to how difficult it is to pass now with the aero.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes total sense. And part of this is also Honda's fault. They're giving their riders a bike that is not able to compete, and they're wanting them to compete with these people. And you've got the most aggressive guy on your team.
Well, I mean, you could say it's Yamaha's fault too, but Fabio doesn't, he's not throwing himself at people.
Yeah, Fabio's pretty good. I mean, he knocked Aleix off at Assen last year, but Fabio's generally pretty good. But you see him make some pretty desperate moves. And again, because it's so tight, you have to now. If you want to make that pass, it's going to be tighter. It's going to be more possibility of contact with that pass because it's so difficult to pass now.
Speaking of Fabio, I thought he did all right with his, what was he, 8th place or 7th place? I think he just beat out Aleix Espargaro, which is pretty good considering.
Yeah, I forget exactly what he placed in.
Yeah, I think it's pretty clear. There's no way he's going to repeat this year either. I think the Japanese factories are in a lot of trouble. If you look at it, they were very resistant to the aero wars. They bolted on wings when they had to. They really didn't spend a lot of time going down that avenue. Honda especially was very complacent with Marc Marquez winning everything. They just didn't feel the need to really do anything. I think 2019 was the last time they had a decent bike for that guy. And Yamaha, they're now the only inline four on the grid. So they don't even have anyone else to reference themselves against like they did with Suzuki. How are we doing in general as an inline four manufacturer, right? So I think they're going to look long and hard at coming out with a V4, which they have zero prototype experience with. So it's going to be a very difficult road for both of them. I think Honda has a little bit better shot at being competitive sooner than Yamaha. For that reason, they already have a lot of the elements in place. They just need to work on that aero and figure out, I guess, get Suter to start building them frames and get that part figured out.
It's interesting because Yamaha's saying it's not a power issue, it's a delivery issue. They say that the inline four is making the power, it's just not putting it down to the ground. Do you think like a firing order change could help that, or do you think they just need to go for the V4?
I just don't know. I had a Yamaha R1, and that 2015 crossplane was just phenomenal. The way that thing puts down power, it was an engine that felt like no other inline four, no other engine to me. I really love that. So I can see why they're really stuck on that engine. But yeah, I think you will see them go the V4 route. That's my guess. It won't be an easy road to hoe, but I think that's the route they will eventually have to go. You just got a completely different dynamic of the bike. They can make that thing do much faster lap times than the Ducati, but because of the arcing lines and the approach on the corners, when you've got a monster bike parking it in front of you, squaring off the corner and blasting out, you don't get to do that. You simply don't get to do that unless you qualify up front and make the break.
Mm-hmm. And those are issues that I feel like Lorenzo and Rossi have been complaining about, and even Maverick for years, and they're just not doing anything. They're not moving.
Yeah, I think you've got to look at, again, the lack of the Japanese wanting to join the aero wars. I think they're still behind on that, which is really important now. It's seeing these wings pop up on the tails. Yeah, for sure. That'll be a tough decision for Yamaha to make. But again, I think Honda's going to get that bike turned around for Marc faster than Yamaha will for Fabio. And it's interesting. We had some of that talk about Marc jumping to another team. I think he'll find it a little interesting. Like Alex has done well. I think going to the Ducati, pretty much everybody does.
Yeah.
Back in the day, they were all very, very different. It wasn't so easy to just jump off of one bike onto another. You look at Fabio. He just magically gelled with that Yamaha. I don't know if it had been the same story had he jumped on a Honda or jumped on a Suzuki. Who knows? But he's clearly able to ride that bike like nobody else. I mean, look where Morbidelli's at again. So.
Mm-hmm. I think it would also benefit Yamaha to have a satellite team, but I don't know who's going to be willing to do that. It looked like VR46 might, but it'd be almost suicide for them to leave Ducati.
Yeah, I think, again, it's all going to come down to that decision of what Yamaha wants to do. And it's not going to be I think they're going to have to wait till, 2027 when the regs are rewritten. I think that'll be when they introduce a V4. So they're stuck with it for now. And I don't think VR46 will go back to Yamaha. It's a big miss not having that satellite team. But even when they had it, they couldn't develop the bike very well at all last year. So I don't think it's as big a miss as it would seem.
What do you guys think of the sprint race format?
I'm still mixed. I'm very much an old school historian of the sport, so how it's going to change the championship, and I know they're going to keep historical records separately, but that's a whole bunch of points that's going to influence the racing. As a fan, great. I can't wait to get to Dakota and see a sprint race on a Saturday. That's sure going to make a Saturdays a lot more fun. It's going to be a few more races, I think, a few more weekends till we start getting the solid opinions from the riders on how they feel about it. But I think it's good. That's one of the things I love about World Supers is you get that race on both days. I like that doubleheader format. So I think it'll make the Saturdays more interesting at COTA for sure. And the Fridays far more important. Yeah. I think the big thing is going to be the setup time. They're now going to have less time to just continue all weekend long to refine the bike. And that's where Ducati's strong point was. They would just get better and better and better and better. I think now with limited setup time, you're going to see some of the other teams, especially Aprilia, who are generally quick out of the box, kind of take advantage of that limited time and get right into the racing quicker.
I think that benefits the KTM team as well. So
yes. Yeah. Again, I think it hurts Ducati the most because they're the team that seem to just really keep refining all weekend long.
I really loved the sprint race. Like at first I wasn't sure about it, but man, when they started going, I was like, this is nuts.
It's action packed and it's cool and everything, but I kind of feel for the riders. I feel like it's twice as much work for them. I mean, we've already seen all the people that are out due to injuries. Mm-hmm. It's going to be more intense, more risky. I did like it because, like I said, it's more, it's more action packed, but I think maybe they should have limited it to maybe half the races, not all the races. I can tell you
they're committed at this point. They're committed to the full 21 rounds, but it's interesting to me as a racer and rider how the riders are dealing with it. It's got to be just another level of stress. I was reading that they're having modified tanks that hold the fuel down lower, that there's completely different settings on the bike. And, when I ride through the weekend, I'm just getting used to the bike. And to have to ride two completely different machines in two different races, not completely different, but definitely just some different feel to the bike for sure.
Yeah, I think this weekend was just, technically as a rider's perspective, it was awful because we lost 4 riders and another rider's injured. So the variables they look awful as far as racing goes. And that's because it's the first race of the season on one of the hardest tracks on the season on a format that nobody's used to. So if anybody's at fault, it's Dorna. You just threw the book at him right out of the gate. It's going to take some time till the riders start to kind of understand who's what and how hard they want to push. And for instance, when Pekka was talking, he's like, well, it kind of comes down to how hard everybody's willing to go, really, is what it comes down to. And like, they're just kind of getting a feel for it out of the gate now, so it's kind of a mess. So I think later into the season, it's going to get more organized, and it's going to give riders the experience. For instance, on soft tires, like I was watching Jack Miller closely, and on the sprint, the front end of that KTM looks so planted, and he just put it wherever he wanted it to go. And then when he switched to the hard tire during the race, you can see the difference in the bounce. You can see he just didn't have the traction, so there was a huge difference. For me, I enjoy it because then I can really see the difference of how the bikes perform. And then you start seeing their weaknesses. So I think the sprint is awesome. I think it's just going to be a matter of time till they understand it and how hard the riders are willing to push, and just go from there, really.
Yeah, again, I think the exposure to injury is one of the big ones that you touched on for sure. It reminds me of Kenny Roberts and Freddie Spencer at the Swedish GP in '83. They'd both won 5 rounds each that year. Freddie, I think, led by a couple of points going into the last round. And in the final corner, the last lap, he put them both in the dirt. And Kenny Roberts had angry words for him, lost the championship to him. And I think that was really the beginning of Kenny's exit from the sport. He's like, look, if I got to race these 23-year-olds who are going to go bonsai and bash their way through. So it's reminding me a little bit more of that. And touching on Portimao again with those injuries, some of that I think might have been the track. Look at Paul Espargaro. There was no air fence there. I forget who it was that commented that he seemed to accelerate when he got to the gravel trap. And you know those cutaway pictures they do at the beginning of MotoGP sessions? I was looking at one of the zoom-ins of the gravel, and there's weeds growing out of it all over the place. Kind of reminded me of my track down in Houston.
Yeah.
But I remember going to Brands Hatch in England, watching some of the motorcycle races there back in 2015. And they had tractors that had blades to groom the gravel and loosen it all up. There was none of that in Portugal. It looked like hard-packed, large rocks. So I think
you're saying the large
a lot of
rocks.
issues with those gravel traps too in Portugal, and the lack of air fence in certain places. So
The large rocks is a big deal because the previous year, Pecco had tweeted about he took a picture of the gravel and showed how large it was, and that's not going to slow you down enough. And he even commented like, "Hey, this needs to be smaller so it absorbs more energy," and you can clearly see that he was correct. So
And they did nothing.
yeah, the gravel traps in Portimao were, I think, were to blame for some of those injuries for sure. Especially the concussion to who was it that got knocked out in testing?
was it Bender? I know he hurt his neck and stuff. So
No, it was one of the other guys had to sit out the final day of testing due to concussion from the large rocks. That was what initiated the conversation again. But Alesia's been complaining about him for 2 or 3 years, and Dorna hasn't done much about that. So shame on them.
yeah.
That gravel's engineered. I mean, I remember first time I walked the gravel trap at Coda, I have a jar of it, and I scooped up some and took it with me. And you look at it, and it's very even. It's very rounded. There's no angularity to it. It's the right size to dissipate energy and slow the rider down. And again, you have to groom it. You can't let dirt and weeds settle in. It becomes hard packed.
And then it loses that energy absorption rate.
Yep.
For sure. No, it's going to be an exciting weekend this weekend at Argentina for sure. And I'm really stoked about going to Coda and seeing that sprint race. Like you said, it is certainly exciting to watch those sprint races right now. So I think I'm on the plus side of that.
So what's the predictions for Argentina? Who do you got? Who do you think is going to be 1, 2, and 3?
I'm willing to put some money that Marquez is not going to podium at Argentina.
Yeah, I'd put my house on that.
I don't know. Obviously, I'm hoping it's going to be another Aprilia weekend out there. I want to see Maverick Vinales get that first podium, get that first win. Not podium, excuse me. He's had those. I want him to get that first win. Aleix, I think you're going to start seeing. Aleix is an awesome rider, don't get me wrong. But I think Oliveira and Maverick are now a little bit quicker than him on that bike. So we'll see as the season progresses.
What do you think, Dustin?
I think I don't think Pecco's going to win. No, and because it's a low traction track.
Okay.
It's low grip asphalt, and what did he get last year? 4th or something?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, another variable, 5th. Yeah, another variable that I'm running in my head right now is the level of just engineering and the step that these guys made. They were a second and a half faster this year than they were last year. Those bikes have made a jump. Like, you want to talk about the next level? Like, you keep reverting back to the older 500s and all that. Like, during that time, that was a huge jump for them. I think we're at a moment now where these bikes are making another huge jump as far as speed goes, which increases the danger and, all the factors that they have to get used to. But I don't think Pecco's going to do a podium on this track because it's a low traction type of track. And I think guys that are comfortable with, spinning and sliding around are going to be the faster guys. And I don't know how comfortable Jorge Martin's going to be, but I think he's going to be up there for sure. But I'm going to give it to Maverick Vinales to win this race.
Okay.
Woo! I could support that right there. I'm on board with that one.
And then I'm going to throw in...
You're going to see Jorge, though. Martin's going to be there.
Yeah, he's going to be there. And I'm also going to throw in Brad Bender. So
Okay.
I'm going to think it's going to be those three, really.
I'm going to say...
Really going to be a bit of an acid test for KTM this weekend. See if they can repeat that bit of magic they had last weekend.
I'm going to go against the grain and say Pecco for number 1, number 2, Bezzecchi, and number 3, Miller.
Yep.
That's a good one. All right, I'll go out on a limb here. Let's go with Maverick for the win. I'm going to get... Man, can Martin stay on board? Let's say Martin for 3rd. And I think Pecco's going to step up and get on that podium. He might get 2nd place and play around with Maverick a bit. So we'll go with that. Poor Alex Rins, though. He seems to be the new Alex Marquez. I think his comment was this week was, Honda, hey, can I get a part, Honda? So
I told you last time, right? I was like, he's going to be
not suited for that bike.
like, that's like the worst bike for his riding style. Like,
he's so smooth and silky on that Honda. It's just not going to work.
let's move Frankie off and put Alex on and just see what happens.
But you see, Amir would have finished the race. I mean, Mir was his style suits the Honda.
Yeah.
interesting. I thought Alex would have gone a little better because he seemed to be picking it up pretty good in testing. But yeah, I think on that satellite team, he doesn't have a hope. I think he's got to be looking at himself and going, how did I end up here and Mir end up over there?
Yeah, I agree.
Because he has a championship and he doesn't. And that's what they look at.
All right, guys. Well, I think it was a good discussion. Wrap it up. See how our race predictions come out. It's coming up Sunday, so won't be too long to wait.
Yeah, looking forward to it. Thanks for having me on. It was a lot of fun to chit-chat MotoGP instead of my usual day job on these podcasts and webinars.
Yes, sir. Thanks for joining us, Tim. And Hog, thank you.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
See you.